All right. So hi, everybody. I'm Josh Bucher, a research analyst for the Cloud Security Alliance. The Cloud Security Alliance is a nonprofit organization focused on bringing security experts together to further research and adoption of the cloud. The Global Security Database Working Group is, got a double duty of watching the waiting room, is an example of these efforts. Please allow me to introduce the two co-chairs for the working group, Josh Bressers and Kurt Seefried. Josh and Kurt, would you mind telling us a bit about yourselves and the Global Security Database project?
Bressers, you want to go first?
Yeah, totally. So hi, I'm Josh. I'm the Vice President of Security at Anchor. We're a security supply chain company that does Sift and Gripe are our two open source projects that are probably the best well known at the moment. We have Anchor Enterprise. But so yeah, I've been involved in the world of security identifiers kind of as long as I can remember, I think, at this point. And so this is one of those projects where Kurt and I started talking and kind of putting some things together. It's been a couple of years, I think, at this point. And we've had a bunch of bumps along the way, you could say. But I mean, fundamentally, we're really excited to have found a home at the CSA. And this puts us in a position where we can obviously try to start building a community. And I mean, there's a ton of people on here, which I think is phenomenal and I'm ecstatic about. And so kind of, I think the most important thing for me is just acknowledging the fact that like we all have our own ideas and kind of preconceptions about all of this. And I think this data is more important than ever. And so I'm excited to build, you know, a group of people who are also interested in it and want to work on it and deal with some of the annoying issues we all no doubt have seen in the past. So yeah, I'm excited. This is going to be awesome. All right, Kurt, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm Kurt Seefried. I've also been doing security identifiers, I think, since 98 or 99. And I was actually on the CVE board for, I think, what, 6 or 7 years and resigned last year. And yeah, I've tried a couple times various efforts to improve and fix the global security vulnerability identifier kind of problem. And I think this time we might actually have something that works because we're basically looking at basically this as an ecosystem rather than just identifiers, which I think has traditionally been one of the problems. And so, yeah, I'm really excited for this to bring the community in and actually build what the community needs and wants, which I think is a big difference. Is as probably most of you know, InfoSec isn't always the best at listening to people and actually giving them what they want. You know, security says no being the old trope. So yeah, I'm really happy to see a lot of people here.
And I suspect Josh is busy letting people in. Okay, so Josh, do you want to drive the agenda? How do you want to do this? I consider you in charge of this.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll walk us through the agenda and let you two kind of cover the specifics of it.
I want to add one last thing. It's totally not confusing at all that there's two people named Josh B working on this project. So anyway, thanks.
Not at all, right? Yeah. All right, so the first thing in the agenda is talking about the current projects that we're working on. The first of those is the overview for the project and how we're building a community with it. Kurt or Josh, I'm not sure which one of you wants to tackle that.
We'll let Kurt take this one.
Yeah, so traditionally, well, there hasn't been a security community for vulnerability identifiers. Like, it really is just that simple. There's a whole bunch of private security identifier databases, which is, I mean, that's a necessary service. And I've actually worked at 2 of those vendors for a period of around 10 years back in the day. And there are sort of some public security identifier projects. There's various, you know, national certs, and there's CV, of course, but they don't really allow true public participation. Like, to put it bluntly, if you want to discuss security identifiers, as far as I know, the only place to really do it right now is Twitter, which is, in my opinion, kind of a fail. So that's one of the biggest things is giving the community a space and a place to actually talk about this and come up with new ideas. Because, for example, the OSV, the open source vulnerability schema and data used by Google, for example, has already made a huge amount of progress in the last year, right? Like, they've got thousands of identifiers, they've got a reasonably well thought out format, they've got tools, they've got data sources feeding in. They're actually making progress, and part of this is because they too are listening to the community and engaging with the community. So like I said, a big part of this is just getting the community, giving us somewhere to talk about this and record all these things, because I keep seeing people come up with good ideas, but well, they have nowhere to live, nowhere to be nurtured, nowhere to be fed and grow. So the community aspect of this is critical, because without a community, it's just me and Josh cranking out identifiers, which Josh and I have done in the past, and it's not really sustainable or that much fun.
Perfect. So would you like to cover a little bit about the database aspect of the project?
Bressers, do you want to take that?
I mean, I can. I feel like we're all staring at a black screen here. Who can share their screen? I can't. I'm not a host.
Yeah.
Kurt or Josh, which would you prefer to?
Let me share it. I sanitized my desktop.
All right. So I'll make you the host.
Okay. There we go. All right. And I apologize for the small font. I'm going to make it bigger. Okay. Can you see that?
Yep, we can. So if you scroll down, there's the how to interact, and there's something called the GSD-database at the moment. Kurt, will you click that link?
Yeah.
And everyone can kind of follow along. It's just, so the intent on all of this is to make all of the data, make cooperating, make interacting as painless as possible. And so this is a data format that Kurt kind of cooked up a long time ago. It's very similar to what the CVE project uses in their experimental GitHub repository. It seems to work for the moment. I'm not saying we're not married to this. This is, again, one of those instances where if someone has an idea, I mean, jump in and we can talk about it and figure it out. But as Kurt kind of clicks around, you can see there's a lot of Linux kernel identifiers in this, and there's kind of a weird story behind that. But basically, the intent is all the data is JSON. It's meant to be easy to parse. The OSV section there is the OSV format, which is something there's a Google OSV project, and the Linux Foundation is kind of owning that right now. We can put a link to the OSV schema in the notes at some point. I can do that after I'm done talking here. But I don't think there's a ton to say other than, like, the data's there. It's somewhat unique at the moment. I won't say it's particularly useful right now, but kind of the intent is to make the data accessible from the perspective of anyone can work on it, anyone can update it, but also to kind of lower the bar for getting identifiers. Because I mean, I know one of the complaints is anyone who's ever been in the industry is sometimes getting identifiers can be difficult. And there's also the issue of, like, malware doesn't get public identifiers, backdoors don't get public identifiers. Like, we all just talked about the Faker and Colors NPM modules, like, no identifiers, right? So I think there's a lot of room for improvement here. And so that's kind of the intent behind all of this. And of course, anyone interested in helping, like, please, we're begging you to help. To date, the vast majority of this work has been Josh, and Kurt. And it's time to, like, break this, like make it something everyone can work on, because I think there's a lot of interest.
Well, and one thing also to make really critically clear, we're not telling you how you should interact with us and what you should be doing. That's up to you. And that is a big change, is that, like, Josh and I, Bressers and I, we've been in this industry for 20 years. From the open source perspective, we know kind of what we need and want, but what does the closed source world want? What does the malware world want? What does the operations world want? Indicators of compromise. And so a big part of it is, if there's something you want to do, let us know, because there's all sorts of new things that need to be done. And I'll be blunt, me and Bressers are old, and we're not even aware of half the industry. So, you know, let us know what it is you want and how you want to interact with us, because that's literally what this community needs right now more than anything else.
Yep. All right, before I'm not going to obsess over the rest of these links at the moment. So I think honestly, Josh Bucher, like, why don't you show us what you've done so far? I should add one other thing. There's a handful of tools at the moment that exist for all of this. None are amazing. It's all work in progress. So when you look at something, don't think like, oh, wow, that sucks. Think like, no, this is an opportunity to help. That's the way to look at this. So Josh Bucher, you want to give us a demo of what you've been working on?
Yeah, and I think, Kurt, if it's all right, we'll actually have you do the actual walkthrough of it,
Okay, sure.
Awesome.
just to make things confusing for you. Yeah, and here I'll share actually copy the link first. And then, so link to the demo is pasted in chat. Looks like, Kurt, you have it open. Could you hard refresh really quick? So Command Shift R.
Oh, right, sorry.
There we go. So yeah, sorry, I'm getting my bearings really quickly. So with this demo, Kurt, do you want to talk a little bit about how we want to make it easier to actually not only see the data and have different namespaces, but also make it easier to get in and edit that data?
Yeah, so one of the things I did when I invented the CV-JSON format is one of the ideas was that we would have certain types of well-structured data that had to be there, like the identifier, right? Like obviously if the identifier isn't there, then it's not an identifier. Things like, you know, the product name and version, the vendor name, things like that, absolutely, you know, we need that. But then the idea was to allow people to experiment with the JSON, right? To essentially dump in kind of whatever they want. Like, oh, you want to dump in hashes of indicators of compromise? Cool, you know, do that. And then we'll sort of figure out maybe a good way to structure it. So the idea is basically, we don't have a format per se, like we use the CV format and the OSV format, primarily the OSV format. And the idea is that the data that is structured in the OSV format will be well structured, easily parsable, easily consumable. And then we sort of have this other experimental data that, you know, is not well structured yet. Because one thing I consistently see is people try to define data formats before they've actually, you know, experimented and looked at the data. So that's one of the big efforts here, is to actually put the data in and then figure out, you know, how do we actually need to structure this? What's the best way to structure this? Because, you know, if we structure it first and then put the data in, we'll probably get it wrong. The second thing is we're using namespaces so that, for example, you know, using your GitHub login, you know, so it's like GitHub : you know, your ID, Kurt Seafried or whatever. You can basically add what you want and need to add to the files without stomping on other people's data, without conflicting with other people's data. And the reality is it's 2022 and we have amazing tools. You know, we have GitHub, we have JSON, we have these things that allow for real easy sharing and real easy collaborative editing if we use them correctly. And so, for example, by namespacing, you know, you can do whatever you want in your version of the file with your namespace, and there's just not going to be, you know, conflict merges with Kurt's namespace or the official GSD namespace or the OSV namespace or whatever. And so that allows us to have people easily collaborate, you know, without stomping on each other's toes. And so the beauty is, for example, we have a bunch of structured data here that you can see that, you know, Josh Bucher's tool knows how to extract. And then we have a bunch of data that it doesn't know how to extract because it's, you know, Kurt just made this up. And that's great. Just display the JSON. And, you know, one of the reasons I love JSON is while it's not great for human readability, it is possible, right? It can be read by humans and understood by humans. So, you know, obviously, for example, looking at this references, you've got a ref source, kind of a name and a URL. And then later on, actually, if you look, when I was adding tweets, I started extracting the data. It's going to take forever. I started extracting the data from the tweets, not these ones, obviously. Oh, there we go. So I started extracting the data from the tweets. So there's the content and a timestamp. And this, and then I realized some of these timestamps I didn't really, or these tweets I didn't care much about, but some I did, and I added a tag called timeline. And this then, of course, allowed me very easily to extract all the tweets with the tag of timeline, which I then used for one of my blog posts. And, you know, it, for example, has things like, well, this is the log for J entry. And, you know, for example, we've got things like, well, this is sort of the first public tweet about it. So, you know, had you really been paying attention to Twitter, you would have seen this and, you know, learned about this exploit in advance of other people. But then it turns out, for example, we see, you know, the head of Cloudflare somewhere down here tweeting that, you know, they saw it in their logs 9 days ago. So, for example, adding this timeline tag, you know, all of a sudden you've got a real easy way to extract a timeline from the data, which, you know, is probably a useful thing. So it's this kind of experimentation that I'm talking about, you know, so we can see what works and what doesn't work. What do people need? What do people not need? What do people want or not want? And it's all in JSON. And if you want to basically modify the data, you can do that. You can basically copy it into your namespace and do whatever the heck you want to it. Like we don't care. It's your namespace. Go nuts.
Perfect. And Kurt, do we want to cover next the actual editing of that? So
yeah, let's do that real quick. So let's say, well, actually, I have a concrete example here. Sorry, Zoom is blocking the top of my screen and being really annoying. So I actually just came across this on Twitter the other day. So which company was it? I forget which company, Sonatype, I want to say. Yeah, Sonatype basically published this really great download dashboard of log4j downloads from Maven. And it turns out something like, what is it, 40? Oh, here we go. Oh, geez, 42% of the downloads are from older versions that are still vulnerable. So that seems kind of like a problem. So, well, let's add that to the entry. So it's as simple as I've already cheated and opened up the file in Atom. Basically, this is a fork of the repo. So I'm just gonna scroll down and just add the URL at the bottom. Oh, okay, I was gonna a lot of URLs here. It's good. So, and longer term, obviously, this will be done with some tooling so that, you know, you don't miss a comma or mangle the JSON, you know, and things like a CI/CD build pipeline to prevent it from getting all messed up. So we'll just change that URL.
I want to stress, Kurt, while you're doing this, that so this is manual at the moment, and that's on purpose because we want to build a culture of, you know, something is better than nothing. And I think especially in security, there's this obsession with perfect. And I think sometimes that holds back a great deal of progress. And so the mantra of the GSD is going to be one of like, try and see, right? Don't worry about building the perfect tool. And like, yeah, editing JSON in a text file, that sucks.
Yeah.
But it's something, right? We have this ability, and something beats nothing every day.
And more to the point, it doesn't matter how badly somebody messes up because it's in Git.
Yeah, just fix it.
Yeah, like we can undo it, we can fix it, we can, you know, it's in Git. That's all I have to say. So I'm just gonna literally hit Control S here. I'm gonna go to GitHub Desktop. Look at that, added reference, commit to main. This is on my fork, push origin. Oh, I'm spacing out. What is the command? Is it control? What is the command to do a push? Command shift D? I am totally spacing out right now.
It's called git push, Kurt.
Or to send a pull request via the GitHub Desktop.
Just use a web interface.
yeah.
Okay, I'll do that way.
And so while Kurt's walking through this really quick, one of the other things that I wanted to cover with the editing too is long-term, we want to make this really easy for non-developers. Basically, if a security researcher or anybody else sees an issue with the GSD, being able to quickly and easily update it from the web interface. So not needing to have a clone of the repo or anything like that. You can just, from the interface, actually click on edit a specific field or a namespace or just the whole thing. And it'll have a request to GitHub to create the actual pull request. but making it really streamlined and easy.
Kurt, you're not in your branch, man. You're on main.
I know. I'm just
Okay.
trying to get it done.
You can see
There
we're
we
very
go. It's
serious
fine.
professionals here.
So literally there we go. It's done. So if we go back to the GSD demo page, we go hit Control R. What is it? Sona type. There we go. It's there in the references now, right? See, it should be this easy, right? Like, and ideally what we'll have is, well, you can see at the top of the demo here, we have an edit button. It doesn't work yet. But like literally,
So,
you know, you want to add a product, edit, add product. You know, you want to add a reference, add reference, click, plug in the values, hit save. And like Josh Bucher said, you know, it'll basically do a little bit of magic on the back end, generate a pull request, which will then be accepted. And actually, I just noticed we have a pull request from somebody. Oh, right. Yeah, because I messed up the name. So yeah, there we go, confirm merge. Yeah, in one of the files, for example, I wrote color.js instead of colors.js, which is the wrong name. And well, it's fixed now, right? He made a pull request, we accepted it, it's done.
Okay, Kurt, we have a great question in the chat. Are you looking at chat?
No.
So if I get the name wrong, I apologize. Francesco asked, how do we moderate this to avoid the data from being unreliable?
Well, so part of that is using the namespaces, right? You don't, the expectation is that the data in the sort of GSD or OSV namespace will be, you know, good and correct, you know, from trusted contributors. I mean, the reality is when somebody submits a pull request, it's very easy to click on their GitHub account name and take a quick look at their account and see if they're legit or not. And also based on the content, it's, you know, the majority of security content is really quickly and easily validated. You know, when somebody links to something like Sonatype, well, Sonatype's a big trustworthy company, big ass, you know, this big dashboard. For all we know, they're making up the numbers. Well, I presume that they're not. And so with the namespacing, you know, if you want to get involved, well, great, you put it in your namespace and people can basically choose to either pay attention to or ignore your namespace, you know, and to determine how trustworthy you are. And obviously longer term, we'll have trust metrics, you know, just like the bug bounties have, where, you know, this person has contributed to GSD, all their contributions have been found to be good, nobody's complained about them. So, you know, they can be trusted. That's just how it works. Okay, so, and then the next question, what's the process to create new GSD identifier? How do we provide or prevent duplicates? Easy. The process for getting a new GSD will be, we'll basically have a form for requesting it. You know, you plug in the information, you submit it, it gets approved quickly, and then it just grabs the next serial number, basically. If there's duplicates, well, that's part of what we're looking to have is relationship data. And so the relationship data would be, for example, this is a child of, or this is a parent of, or this is a duplicate of. And so, for example, CV 2021-44228 is a good example of the log4j1, because this thing, if it has every vulnerable product and service listed, last I checked, the CISA GitHub repo and the Dutch one, excuse me, have over 5,000 affected products listed. And so actually that's a discussion we need to have, is, you know, do we want a GSD/CVID with over 5,000 products listed in it? I'm not sure how useful that is or if that's the correct way to go. So for example, we might want to start splitting and having these quasi duplicates. And again, this is the beauty of this, you know, the community is going to have this discussion. The community is going to do some experimentation and the community can see what works. And even better, we can take the data so that the community can ignore it or pay attention to it if they want. You know, we're already looking at taking the data with, this is a vulnerability, this is an exploit, this is, you know, like literally this is a rumor. You know, a great example of that log4j thing, it was public for 2 or 3 weeks before, you know, it kind of got actually known as a security vulnerability. And it sure would have been nice to know about that rumor. You know, it was being discussed on Minecraft Discord servers, chats of all things. And it was known that you could send a message in Minecraft and hijack the server. You know, it's those kind of rumors that we need to know about. So again, everything's in GitHub. It's JSON data. We can mark things as duplicate. We can mark them as, you know, this is a duplicate of this, or this turns out not to be a vulnerability, or this turns out to, just not be as big a concern as we thought. Maybe, and maybe in the future it does become a bigger concern. So I'm not super concerned about it, because part of it is the community is going to determine how to handle this.
There was one other question in chat, Kurt, that was, how do we avoid early release and avoid the backsplash? And I assume that's a question about embargoed IDs. So this is something that I think needs to be discussed in public at some point. I think in the perfect world, you don't need embargoed IDs because you can get an identifier in a second or two. But I know that isn't always practical in the real world. So I think how we want to do that is going to be a community question and a community answer.
Yeah, and right now, one of the general criteria for getting a GSD is there has to be some sort of public source, because otherwise you're just coming to us with random words, right? Like, so there has to be some public source. But on the flip side, what if somebody like Tavis Ormandy says like, hey, I need a GSD for a thing in the Linux kernel? Well, Tavis Ormandy is generally very well trusted, so I'm just gonna, I feel like we should probably hand him a GSD, and then, he can have his private GSD and then make it public at some point. But on the flip side, do we want to have, public data only? And again, like Josh Bresser said, that's something for the community to discuss and decide. And even better, no matter what we do, we'll take the data. So for example, you'll have a data entry that says this is a super secret embargo GSD that, is super secret squirrel, and you don't get to know about it. Cool. Like, personally, I would ignore that stuff because there's nothing actionable there for me to do.
Yep.
So something that was brought up in a DM as well is having information for kind of the layman or the press or
Absolutely.
those who, yeah.
Yeah, and okay, I know Josh Bresser doesn't want me mentioning Wardley maps yet again, but basically Wardley mapping is a technique for looking at problems and where the value and the sort of maturity of solving that problem lies. And one aspect of this is one of the most valuable things we can do as a security identifier is give good, actionable, understandable data to end users and to the press. Like, this is a true story, I'm not making this up, but I remember, Bresser's remember when the Red Hat had the big meeting in the Czech Republic, the Heartbleed thing, and I literally was traveling, cleared U.S. Customs, and you clear U.S. Customs in Canada, and the U.S. Border Services guy asked me, what do you do for a living? Oh, what about this Heartbleed thing? And I literally had to tell him, like, yes, I know about Heartbleed. My boss is actually almost on the news about it. People need to know about this. Like, he literally was like, do I need to buy a new router and upgrade my router? And I'm like, no, you don't. Like, nobody's going to try and hack your router with Heartbleed. Trust me, you're fine. So one aspect of this is having better human readable data. And if we go to the GSD demo, I don't know. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Okay. Parses the description. Fantastic. So if you look at our description for the Apache vulnerability, it's massive. And one thing I decided a few weeks ago is it's not just enough for the vulnerability identifier to have a pile of URLs. We have to pick winners, right? Like, we have a million links to tweets and a million links to projects. Cool. Who cares? So for example, here's the hot patches. And we talk about, that there's several hot patches, and one of the best ones is the I want to say the Credo one. There's detection, oh yeah, here we go. Best hot patch, the Credo one. Best detection, right? There's different detection things. There's jar hashes, Zero, burp suite, and map scripts. There's scanners for this thing. Picked basically 3 of the best scanners. There's an exploit kit available for this thing. And so right here, instead of just having kind of a bit of weebly wobbly, there's a vulnerability in JNDI parsing, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, here's some actual useful stuff. And so long-term, I would like to see, better analysis, better, more really human readable data. And I don't mean just human readable in the sense of like a bunch of English, but human readable in the sense of like, we've written this and actually distilled it and made it understandable so that, here's the 10-second elevator pitch for your manager. Say these words, blah, 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 right? Things like that. And again, we're happy to accept that. We're happy to have the community generate it and discuss what they want and what they need. Maybe somebody comes up with a templating system for this. I don't know. But again, it's, we're going to engage with the community on this and let the community figure it out and come up with solutions and actually embrace those solutions. As far as, so the NVD provides CVSS scoring. And well, if somebody in the community wants to assign CVSS scoring to GSDs, I mean, they can do so. They can put it in their namespace, and assuming they become a trusted contributor, then then it would go into the more general namespace of the GSD or OSV namespaces. And one thing to remember too is it should be the common case, and I actually designed the data format to support this, that there should be multiple CVSS scores for a given vulnerability, because one vendor might enable a feature by default that another vendor does not enable by default, so they're not affected at all, or they have some other configuration change that makes it less severe, or for example they ship the code but don't use it at all. So again, with this kind of coverage and everything, it's up to the community to decide what they want.
Yep.
So, and if we want to continue talking about this, just let me know. But I think this does actually make a good segue into how people can participate with the project.
Yep, I agree. I agree. Okay, so kind of here's where we get to the brass tacks of all this is, if you look at the agenda, which I'll paste in the chat one more time, just for anyone who might have shown up after it got pasted. So if you look at the agenda, there's a how to interact, and the real intent of all of this is to build an open source project. And so for anyone who's ever been involved in open source, you understand that this is very much a situation of you're kind of building the track as the train goes down it. And that's by design. We don't want to try to over engineer anything. We don't want to try to put too much structure in place, because sometimes that structure can get in the way or it can provide unintended consequences. So this is all very, very bare on purpose. There's the Cloud Security Alliance has something called Circle, which is like a web form of sorts. There's a link to that, sign up, participate there. There's a mailing list. I mean, we all know how mailing lists work. I don't think there's any exciting anything there. There's a Cloud Security Alliance GitHub organization. And if you look at it, we put 2 links in there, the database and just what we call project plans, but there's a bunch of GSD related repos today. Just go to the Cloud Security Alliance organization. You can search for GSD and you'll see what's there. There's some tooling things in there. There's project plans. There's the data. There's, I don't even know what else is there off the top of my head. So just kind of take a look there. And again, open source. If there's something you want to do, if there's a question you have, start a discussion, file issues, pull requests, all that. This isn't one of those, I'll just sit and wait. Like, get involved, do it. If you think the demo code that we've written needs work, fix it. If you think there's data that can be updated in the database, update it. That's, and additionally, we also recognize that we'll say the data format in the database needs some effort. Please help. Like we know anything you see, we're well aware of. Okay, cool. So
there's actually an entire file discussing that in the project plans.
And there's also, if there's other avenues anyone thinks we should be using to communicate or tracking or anything, let us know. I mean, get involved. Again, file issues, have conversations. I think for what it's worth, the easiest place to ask questions and propose new things is probably going to be the mailing list, just because that's kind of how mailing lists work. But there's so many options. It's, we want to be as open source as possible. The intent here, there's always the joke is it's not a working group, it's a talking group. I don't even want to think of this as a working group as much as like, this is an open source project, right? Like code or GTFO sort of situation.
Or data.
Well, yeah, or okay, same thing.
Well, but that's one thing I think that's important to make a distinction here is this is not just about software and tooling. This is also about, data and analysts and people doing CVSS analysis. And, I mean, the Log4j thing is a great example. There are literally 100 deeply thought out, amazing write-ups of it, from the technical to the, here's kind of how DevOps, SecOps kind of failed in this case, and looking at other vulnerabilities, like there are amazing write-ups of this stuff that just sort of quietly sit there and never, people probably aren't even aware of it, right? And part of it is because they don't even have an identifier. So discovering them, as we all know, if you're on Twitter, like you'll run across a tweet where somebody does an amazing analysis of some issue on Twitter. And it's like, how the heck do I, how do I capture that, right? And that's part of what we want to do here is give a way for that stuff to get captured. And so, you don't even have to be making new content, just, enriching the existing identifiers with content. Or, if you come across a great, like there's a great thing on Hacker News about, how some person handled a mystery Raspberry Pi 4 with a mystery Bluetooth Wi-Fi dongle found in their data center closet. I'm debating whether or not that should get a GSD identifier as an incident, because how they handled it is quite fascinating. They did some forensics work to figure out what was on this Raspberry Pi 4 and what was going on. And so, if you want to do data and you don't want to code, please, absolutely. We have a lot for you to do.
Perfect. Yeah, and just to reiterate too, we'll also be having those recurring working group meetings. So the next one will be on January 31st at 9 a.m. Pacific time, which is also noon Eastern time. It'll recur every 2 weeks at the same time, and we'll have the link to join on the working group landing page, which is linked right there in the agenda. I'll also copy it in here in a second. So next up, do we want to talk about how people can suggest new efforts?
I think mailing list is probably the best thing for large things. That's what I've been using. If it's like specific technical things, filing issues in GitHub is also great. Especially if it's if it's about existing code or existing data. Part of the hope here is like if you spot a problem in a GSD identifier, long term we want to have some tooling to help you do this. But ideally, what we want to see is you file an issue, and if the issue is literally like this GSD has this data that I think is wrong. Hey, thank you. That is so much better than nothing. Like a great example. Kurt doesn't know what colors.js is called. I apparently kept calling it color or color.js or whatever because I was not paying attention enough. And if you want to do a pull request and actually correct it, fantastic. We love that. But like literally, if all you want to do is file an issue and say, I think this is wrong, or I think this is wrong because, please do that. That we want to have participation with an on-ramp, not this, you have to generate a perfectly formatted, perfectly correct GSD before you can participate. No. We want all sorts of, all the small stuff too. If it's a spelling error, a grammatical error, yeah, please let us know. All the way up to, here's this, like somebody just mentioned in chat, something different than CVSS scoring called EPSS. I'm gonna actually have to Google that because I don't know what EPSS is off the top of my head.
I mean, that's a great example of it. Yeah. I mean, if you want it to be added, add it. That's kind of the intent here. Is if there's something we think can be valuable. Yeah, it looks pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, whoa. How have I never heard of this?
I've never heard of it. I mean, but at the same time, this is one of my frustrations with the security universe is there's all these really cool things going on and it's really hard to find them sometimes. So this is where obviously the bigger the community, the more input we get, which makes us all smarter.
Yeah, I mean, they've been doing this since 2017 with over, what? Yeah, okay, perfect example. Yeah, so please send that to the mailing list because, wow.
Yeah,
I had no freaking idea.
Yeah, seriously. I love it.
Awesome. So do we want to move on to the Q&A section?
Yep.
Perfect. And just a quick clarification on this. So please use the raise hand functionality to request coming off of mute. We'll have a Q&A section that's a part of the recording, and then we'll also end the recording and have a second Q&A for those that want to have it be more off the record type questions. So yeah, I guess if anyone would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll give it a few moments here.
Yeah, and if you also want to have, so there's obviously a lot of public ways to engage with us, but if you want to engage with us more privately, as people join the effort, I'm gonna, I don't see any problem. For example, if somebody emails, me and the other two Joshes saying, I want to discuss this thing privately before it becomes public, or maybe, I work for some company and we can't kind of have this discussion publicly, I'm fine with that, so we would prefer public participation, but obviously we want people to participate as much as possible.
I do have one question for Josh Bucher. Where is there an invite or a link or something to because the next meeting is next week, is it, or the week after?
And I see your hand, so I'll get you in just a second. So
I jumped to the front of the line. I apologize.
So just so I make sure that I'm answering the right question. So when is the next working group meeting?
I found it. It's the 31st, but how do people get like a link or an invite to that?
Yeah, so we have the link on the working group landing page, which I will copy paste in the chat here. And then we'll also be circulating the invite link to Circle and the mailing list and the various other locations as well.
Okay, great.
So, Kurt, could you?
Yeah. So a question from Ruben, are networking and hardware vulnerabilities also part of GSD? For example, a wireless device stripping off certain VLAN tag for no reason. Absolutely. So one of the plans is to have the GSD increase scope of coverage significantly. So for example, we will definitely cover vulnerabilities and exposures and weaknesses in software, in hardware, and in services. I also want to see incidents, like I just wrote up the crypto.com thing because, well, here's the reality. Somebody just stole 15 million bucks worth of ether from crypto.com. There is clearly a software or some sort of vulnerability in some sort of software, and it probably affects other people as well, because unless it's some purely custom written code that crypto.com deployed that is affected, chances are there's an open source library or something that's vulnerable out there. And I would like to see that fixed so that the exchange I use doesn't get hacked and I don't lose all my half of an Ethereum or whatever it is I have right now. And again, that goes to the tagging of the data. So for example, it's actually in the it's in the GitHub. I'm not going to dig for the issue right now, but basically, it's in an email sent to the mailing list, and it's in the archives. The archives are public, but basically I'm looking at, tagging the data with, this is a vulnerability, this is an exploit, this is hardware, this is software, this is a service, this is an incident, this is a, it might be, turns out to just be straight up a scam. There's nothing technical about it. It's just a good old fashioned scam, like that recent Dune book thing where they spent what, $2.3 million or whatever buying some Dune book, thinking they were going to get the copyright and ripping people off. So for example, had that somehow made it into GSD, we'd label it clearly as like, this is not technical, this is a scam. And so the people that care about just technical vulnerabilities can very easily filter and say, look, I just want to see vulnerabilities in hardware and software. Show me that, give me that sort of traditional view of the on-premises world versus somebody who wants to, I want to see every vulnerability associated with Amazon. So yeah, scope and coverage will be expanded and also tagged. And again, that's
okay, hold on,
stop.
Kurt, hang on. We need to get to the people with hands raised, but fundamentally, this is a community. If you want scope and coverage expanded, like, we need to discuss it, and you know what I mean? That's part of the beauty of all this. All right, raised hands. Josh, can you unmute?
Yep. Yeah, so, and apologize if I butcher this, Francesco, let's get you off mute here.
Hey guys, great contribution. This is something we've been working really heavy on and open sourcing, but I guess we'll be contributing heavily on this. One of the main, a couple of two issues that we've been having is the correlation or the wide range of vulnerabilities. We have CVE with pretty good understanding, but then we have, especially for cloud, we have a lot of misconfiguration that gets missed completely out. And how do we rate them? Because I guess circling back to the question of CVE, CWE, CVSS, CWSS, and then the resizing. First of all the vendors have a different kind of scoring system, us including, and it can turn to be a lot of data duplication inside the same CVE. So how do how do we provide a reliable single source of information without, overloading with duplicate or same information, different kind of flavor?
Well, so part of it is having the tagging so that people can filter it. Part of it too is that if you want to have sort of a one size fits all CVSS score, as we all know, the way NVD does it is they basically take a worst case scenario, apply it, and so you end up with CVSS scores that tend to be really on the higher side than they should be. And this is not so much, this is basically a failure of the data formats and the use of the data formats, right? There's no, like, I know for a fact that Red Hat, we scored every single issue with the CVSS score as to how it specifically affected Red Hat, and even more specifically, specific products, right? So Satellite 6, that was one of my children, but there would be CVS scores for Satellite 6 that were absolutely trivial because we just didn't use that feature, right? So we weren't really affected. And that data exists, and it's in the Red Hat, Bugzilla system and whatnot, and in their data files. Yeah, good luck. Nobody can really, use it easily. So for example, what I want to see longer term is some tooling that imports that data into the GSD format. And so you have a GSD, ID with a global CVSS score of X, Red Hat CVSS score of, X -1, and a specific Red Hat, Satellite 6 score of like 3 or whatever, with not just the data there, but the links to like, how did we determine the CVSS? Why did we determine this? Well, because Red Hat said it over here. Click the link and like, that's what Red Hat said, it's in their Bugzilla. And so that's part of this effort, is to have better and more linked data. Because one thing that frustrates me to no end is to read a security vulnerability description that says XYZ is vulnerable. But like, why? Like, did the vendor say that? Did the, like, why? Like, where did that data come from? Because I eventually track it down and find out that it's wrong, or somebody misunderstood. I remember Josh Bucher. I remember we looked at that one security vulnerability, and the CISA was the original source, and it was like version 8 was vulnerable, version 8.1 and above was fixed, maybe, but 8.1 might also be vulnerable. But what about the 8.0 stuff? And he and I looked at this and spent the better part of, I think, an hour reading different vendor reports and trying to trace this down. And as I remember, Josh Bucher, you and I both we came to different conclusions. We both had our reasons for it. And yeah, like it, but at least, we would have added that data to the GSD. Here's basically, we think this is true because of, here's the link to the original data. And so that's a big thing we want to see, is that here's the data, here's what we think, and here's why. Like, here's the source.
I guess there is a value in the base. I wouldn't get more than the base scoring and then add in the value, because then there is too many variable, and then you have like you could potentially end up generating more confusion, because then you get into the realm of how it is deployed, which product, and I like the idea of the product without, I'm sorry if I'm hogging a little bit of call, but it's really good data and it's really interesting conversation. Yeah. But
so the funny thing is, I actually built the CV JSON format with this in mind, and the idea was there was containers. So you would have, say, an affected product, an affected version, and a score, or you could have a config and then a score. And so again, the idea is to link the data so that if somebody wants to add a CVSS, because for example, there are many vulnerabilities which are absolutely fine and dandy until you flip one switch, and then it becomes an end of the world vulnerability. And
not to cut us off, but I want to make sure that we give everyone a little bit of time to.
Let me take code offline. I'll reach out to you, and then we can have a long discussion on this. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, so we got Kobe next. Ask, unmute, lower hand.
Hey, thank you. So first, I would like to echo what Francesco said, and my opinion is that we need to develop about the scoring. And from my experience, I find myself day after day that the scoring is really depends in, I would say, the business line you are, and not every vulnerability or threat is equal to others. And I will relate it to the comment actually I raised my hands on when Court referred to my comments on layman explanations. Court, you still gave a technical explanations, and I will try to explain. I have a very unique position right now. I joined a startup as a CISO, which is a relatively big startup, is 60 people and going up to 100 this year. And I found myself trying to explain people why log4j is like the backdoor you have that goes to the garden. You don't use it, doesn't say that the burglar will not use it, because all the development team told me, yes, we do have this library, but we don't use it. So you need to explain them why not using a vulnerability doesn't make it safe. So when I refer to laymen, I think we need to find the right story that goes with the business and explain it. And that will also help them to score correctly the threat, because no one looks on the dozens of sites and databases that provide CVEs or threats of vulnerabilities or code level hotspots or whatever, which have dozens by a day. I think we need to communicate more to the common people, even if they are developers or think they are expert IT technicians.
So one bit of good news there is we already have that in the form of the press, right? The press writes articles for laymen, like, and they don't always get it right. Like I've looked at, various, like the CBC, I'm Canadian, so the CBC is I'm going to beat on them. Sometimes they get it really right and sometimes they kind of get it really wrong. So one aspect of what I want to see is, and I don't know how much fair use applies here, but for example, the press does break these things down into things that are more understandable for lay people. We can either link to that, maybe reuse some of it, or ideally, get people with that kind of writing talent to put that data into the GSD. And the reality is, if anybody wants to add pretty much any data to the GSD, and getting media people into the group is actually on the road plan. Like it's literally, yes, that is on the to-do list, but I want to have something to show them. I've actually got a list of journalists to reach out to, because those are literally they do this and they do it well.
Yeah, because I found myself trying to explain, I think in the first month that was reported, you speak about the press reported on 140 different variants of log4j. And I understood that no one in the company really understand me. So I told them very easily, think that the COVID will evolve and have 140 variants in a month. Everyone took that. So this level of explanations we need to do to the business owners, because then they can understand what they're facing. Because I think that today's security is like the 90s or 80s of QA. Everyone speak about it, but hardly fund it.
Yep, I agree. All right, we got 3 minutes. Josh, do you want to kill the recording and see if anyone else has any super secret questions they want to ask?
Absolutely. All right, so give me a moment. Stop the recording. Let me read this pop-up really quick, make sure.